You said goodbye to someone last year, maybe longer ago than that, and somewhere in your chest right now reading this sentence, something just tightened. You didn't choose that. You didn't decide to feel it. Your body did that on its own without asking permission. That's strange when you think about it. The person isn't in the room. They might not even be in your thoughts most days. And yet your body still keeps a ledger, a quiet running account of every person who mattered and then wasn't there anymore. You never noticed you were carrying it, but you are and you have been since before you could speak. Here's where it gets stranger. This isn't a personality trait. It isn't something you develop because you're sensitive or because of one particular relationship that went wrong. It's wiring. It's older than your language, older than your memories, older than the concept of goodbye itself. To understand why, you have to go back to a time when losing the wrong person didn't just hurt. It killed you. The psychiatrist John Bowlby spent decades studying what happens to infants separated from their caregivers, and what he found reshaped how the entire field of psychology understood human bonds. Infants aren't just emotionally attached to their parents. They are biologically dependent on them in a way that has nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with survival. A human infant separated from its caregiver for too long in the environment your ancestors evolved in was an infant who was about to die. No food, no protection, no warmth. Bowlby called this the attachment system, and he argued it wasn't a soft, optional feature of being human. It was hard-coded, non-negotiable, as fundamental as the drive to breathe. Think about what that means for a moment. Why does a baby cry the instant a parent leaves the room, even for 30 seconds? Why does that same baby stop crying almost instantly the moment the parent returns? That reaction isn't manipulation, and it isn't weakness. It's an alarm system doing exactly what it evolved to do. The cry is a survival signal, broadcast at maximum volume, because for nearly all of human history, an unattended infant was an infant in mortal danger. The relief that follows reunion isn't just comfort. It's your nervous system standing down from a 5-alarm fire. And here's the part that should stop you for a second. You never stopped having that system. You just got better at hiding what it does to you. There's a research finding that makes this almost impossible to ignore. In the 1950s, the psychologist Harlow ran a series of experiments with infant monkeys, giving them a choice between two artificial mothers. One was made of bare wire, but offered milk. The other was covered in soft cloth, but offered nothing to eat. Every single infant monkey chose to cling to the cloth mother, visiting the wire mother only briefly to feed before rushing back to the comfort of touch. Harlow's conclusion overturned decades of assumption. Attachment wasn't just about who fed you. It was about who made you feel safe enough to stop being afraid. Food kept the body alive. Comfort kept the nervous system from collapsing. So what happens when that source of comfort disappears permanently, for good? Your body doesn't have a separate protocol for permanent loss versus temporary separation. It runs the same ancient alarm either way, just louder and longer. This is why grief feels physical, not just emotional. Chest tightness, trouble breathing, exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Researchers have documented something now called broken heart syndrome, a real, measurable weakening of the heart muscle triggered by acute emotional loss, mimicking the symptoms of an actual heart attack. Your ancestors' bodies didn't have the luxury of separating psychological pain from physical pain. To the nervous system, they were, and still are, the exact same signal. Here's something you've probably felt but never had language for. Why does the absence of someone feel so much louder than their presence ever did? The neuroscientist James Coan ran a study that gets at this directly. He placed people in an MRI scanner and threatened them with mild electric shocks, then measured brain activity under 3 conditions: alone, holding a stranger's hand, and holding the hand of someone they loved. Holding a loved one's hand didn't just feel comforting. It measurably reduced activity in the threat response regions of the brain, as if the presence of that person told the nervous system the danger was smaller than it actually was. Coan described close relationships
as a kind of outsourced nervous system. Other people literally functioning as an extension of your own capacity to handle threat. Which means when someone leaves, whether through distance, conflict, or death, you don't just lose their company. You lose part of your threat detection system. No wonder the world feels louder and less safe once they're gone. This reframes something most people never examine. You assume the people who left you just stopped mattering once the relationship ended, but your body doesn't work that way, and it never has. It doesn't file people under past and move on the way a filing cabinet would. It keeps a physiological trace of every person who was ever, even briefly, part of your survival system. That's why a song can undo you 8 years later. That's why a smell, a street corner, a particular quality of afternoon light can suddenly deliver you straight back into a feeling you thought you'd outgrown. You didn't imagine that reaction. You didn't choose it. Your body simply never deleted the file. Why does this matter for how you live right now? Because once you understand this, the intensity of certain feelings stops seeming irrational. You're not broken for still reacting to an old absence. You're not weak for feeling destabilized after a friendship. Quietly faded, even if nothing dramatic happened. Even if you can't point to a single reason. Your nervous system evolved in small groups of maybe 50 to 150 people, where every relationship was a survival resource, and where losing even one person from that group measurably reduced your odds of making it through the next hard season. Losing someone wasn't just sad in that world. It was dangerous. Your body still treats it that way, because as far as your oldest wiring is concerned, nothing has changed. Consider, too, why reconciliation feels so disproportionately relieving. Why a single text back from someone you thought had gone quiet can flood you with relief, out of all proportion to the situation. That flood isn't dramatic. It's your attachment system standing down, the same mechanism Bowlby documented in infants, just wearing an adult disguise. The stakes feel enormous because, to a very old part of your brain, they once were. Your ancestors who felt nothing when the group grew distant, who shrugged off exclusion, who didn't fight to repair fractured bonds, tended not to survive long enough to become anyone's ancestor. The ones who felt loss acutely, who were driven to reconnect, who couldn't simply move on without a physical cost, kept their place in the group. You come from an unbroken line of people who cared too much to let each other go easily. That intensity you sometimes feel isn't a flaw. It's proof the system worked. There's another piece of this that rarely gets talked about, and it has to do with the people who never technically left at all, the ones you simply grew apart from, or lost touch with, slowly enough that there was never one clean moment to point to. Why does that kind of loss sometimes hurt more than a loss with a clear cause? The social neuroscientist John Cacioppo spent much of his career studying loneliness, and one of his central findings was that isolation doesn't register in the body as a neutral, passive state. It registers as a threat. Chronic loneliness elevates stress hormones, disrupts sleep, and even alters immune function, producing physiological wear that Cacioppo compared to the toll of chronic stress from any other source. Your body doesn't distinguish between the danger of a predator and the danger of disconnection. Both trigger the same underlying alarm because for nearly all of human history, both meant the same thing. A person who wandered too far from the group, or who was slowly excluded from it without a single dramatic event, faced the same fate as a person who was cast out all at once. Slow disappearance was just as lethal as sudden abandonment. Your body still keeps score of both the same way. This is also why anniversaries hit the way they do, why a date on a calendar can carry weight you can't fully explain to someone who wasn't there. You might tell yourself it's just a number, that nothing about the date itself is special, and rationally, you'd be right. But your body isn't running on the calendar. It's running on pattern recognition, built over hundreds of thousands of years, and pattern recognition doesn't care whether the trigger makes logical sense. It only cares whether the pattern matches something it once filed away as significant. The date itself didn't do anything. Your nervous system just noticed the shape of the year circling back toward a moment it never fully closed the file on. Consider, too, why grief rituals exist in some form in nearly every culture on Earth, from wakes to sitting Shiva, to elaborate weeks-long mourning periods. Anthropologists studying grief across cultures have repeatedly found that societies with almost nothing else in common, separated by oceans and thousands of years, independently developed structured practices for processing loss, often involving physical proximity to other people during the worst of it. That convergence isn't a coincidence. It suggests something built into the species itself, a recognition, encoded long before anyone wrote it down, that loss is a physiological event that people were never meant to metabolize alone. The isolation makes the alarm louder, not quieter, which is part of why grief handled entirely in private so often feels heavier than grief that's shared, even when nothing about the loss itself has changed. There's a strange kind of comfort available here, if you let yourself sit with it. The people who've left you haven't actually left the parts of you that mattered most. Your body kept the imprint of what they gave you, the safety, the calm, the sense of being tethered to something bigger than yourself. That imprint doesn't disappear just because the person did. It becomes part of the baseline your nervous system measures every new relationship against. In a strange way, everyone who ever mattered to you is still doing a small amount of work inside your body, whether you're aware of it or not. So the next time your chest tightens for no obvious reason, when a memory arrives uninvited and knocks the air out of you for a moment, remember what's actually happening underneath. That isn't dysfunction. That's an ancient bookkeeping system, older than memory itself, quietly doing what it has always done. You said goodbye to someone last year, maybe longer ago than that. And somewhere in your chest where right now your body is still keeping the account exactly as it was built to.